there are three main elements that we need to consider as we're going into the 21st century. That is, we have a continually growing urban sprawl in Australia. We go out rather than up more often than not. We've got large fuel accumulations in our bushland areas that we need to manage, and we've got climate change upon us. So those three elements put together are making us think that in the 21st century we're just going to have hugely increased urban interface fire risk because of the increased frequency and the larger area that we were exposed to. If we look at living on the edge, that urban fringe edge, there's essentially two extremes of the urban interface, that hard edge where the bushland abuts the suburbs, and then right out to isolated houses or dwellings in a rural setting. Anywhere in between that, those two extremes is regarded as urban interface as far as we can see for a definition anyway. One thing I do know is it is a global problem, and that's why I did go and have a look at some of the other places. I'll show you some urban interface fires here from different places. In Spain, you can see here, the USA, in California, Portugal, and here's one in Hobart. Now these are all, if you look at the slides, you can see fairly similar by just looking at them, and the truth is that's because the climates are generally the same, and there is vegetation that comes right into the house area. Essentially, the urban interface is where the bush meets the houses. Here is a fire that we had in Hobart on the 12th of October 2006. It was at Sugarloaf Road on the Eastern Shore in Risdon Vale, and it just went all afternoon, but it took a while to control or to deal with. Now, this occurred on an extreme fire danger day, and that's really important that we're talking about urban interface on an extreme fire danger day, not on a normal day. So the tactics that firefighters employ, which we call defensive firefighting tactics to protect homes, are only employed when we have high fire dangers. Now, we'd had a record dry winter, and the soil dryness was 134, which meant we needed 134 millimetres of rain to make the ground wet enough, or so it didn't carry fire, so that the soils were and the fuels were damp enough and safe enough. So the temperature was high, 33 degrees. Wind was north-northwesterly, gusting up to 90 kilometres an hour, and the relative humidity was down to 4%. So it was an extreme fire danger day of 123. We would class that as catastrophic fire danger today. The fire travelled 10 kilometres that afternoon, and spotting ahead was the embers were approaching, say, 500 metres ahead of the fire front itself. Some 750 homes were threatened. Thankfully, hardly anything was lost in that fire. Power was lost to the suburbs, smoke choked the highways, Hobart was gridlocked. These are the sorts of fires that are quite chaotic. Residents become confused, day becomes night, embers are dropping around them everywhere, and they're not sure where the fire's actually coming from necessarily. So it really can be quite horrendous for those people. Then firefighters, police and everyone tries to converge in that area, with people making their own isolated decisions whether they're going to stay or home. So what firefighters need to do on these urban interface fires is have the best chance of making order out of that chaos as quickly as they can. What we did notice, that indirect attack failed twice. Indirect attack is an attempt to backburn. Because of the conditions, the winds were too horrendous, the backburns, we could not get them in. Water bombing had little effect, again because of the wind. Aircraft have difficulty flying at certain wind speeds, and the water doesn't necessarily hit the ground where you want it. It can be blown away. And as I said earlier, everyone was involved. Police, firefighters, residents were all there, all in the same place. That's quite different to an isolated bushfire on the west coast of Tasmania, where we're quite happy not to worry about it. But when we have the smoke blowing over everyone's roofs, that's when it really matters. Conventional wisdom would say to us that a bushfire on its own is all we need to do is control the perimeter of the fire. What we would do in high fire danger days before extreme, we would go indirect, that is, we'd try a backburn to backburn into the fire, so fighting fire with fire, and then directly attack the sides or the flanks of the fire with men and trucks to extinguish the fire with water where it's less intense. We often have ample time and space to do that, and we're dealing with forest fuels. When you look at a structure fire and your usual residential fires, we are all geared up for that, for an internal ignition. All the building codes are set up for some appliance that might cause a fire from inside the home, within the compartments in the home. So firefighters will attack structures and try and contain fires to the compartments, and they'll do that internally inside the structure. They normally deal with a single building. They have a couple of fire trucks attend, so there's ample resources to deal with that particular incident, and they're able to extinguish everything and make sure it's well and truly out before they leave. Well, these conventions don't hold true when we're talking about these urban interface fires, where the bushfire is actually moving into the built environment.
What's different with urban interface fires is that the conventions that have been held by separate services that may have even been set up for bushfire or structure fire don't necessarily apply. What we have is multiple structures being threatened by external ignitions. And as you could look here, structure fire agencies are prepared for the internal ignitions and to extinguish flames from within the building. So we're looking at multiple buildings. We will not have ample resources because we cannot get enough trucks to protect 55 houses in an instant. So we can't have a vehicle parked in every driveway, and we won't be able to spend an hour extinguishing one home when the other 35 are threatened, and firefighters need to therefore move quickly to do that and rely on residents to finish up the fire or finish off the small bits that they need to extinguish in their own home. So there's not ample time and space, and it's not forest fuels. It's actually the fuel state's changing into the residential area. So it's quite a unique and different beast, if you like, and we've been set up in separate jurisdictions for bushfire, separate jurisdictions for structure fire, and when we look at this problem to date, it's often been the other guy's problem. The other agencies have thought, oh well, that's going to be fixed by the bushfire agency, or the structures are going to be dealt with by the structure firefighters, and that now needs to come together from a fire service point of view, because these are really important types of fires. They are, as I'll go on to say in this slide, and I've mentioned already, that we're talking about defensive operations to protect homes. These come into play when we've got the high fire dangers index above extreme, so it's extreme, severe and catastrophic levels, because we can't actually do much about the fire itself other than play with its flanks. We want to minimise the impact of the fire on the community, and we have to go to a defensive mode, that is just to protect the isolated dwellings. It is critical, absolutely critical, to have a firefighting chance to have defendable space around those homes, else they will be lost. And having a resilient community is what we need to be considering in our planning. So these fires are dangerous, complex, high stakes, time critical, with a significant political and media pressure. There's a huge information demand on firefighters when they're in the middle of these firefighting efforts, because the public need to be able to get information to make their own decisions as to whether they're going to leave or not. And it is very important that firefighters are able to concentrate resources, make the fire ground, as we call it, as safe as we possibly can. And one of the key things to do that is to make sure that we have control of the fuel, and we have planned the layout of the township properly.